Hey everybody, today I'm going to be going over all of the weapons in Chivalry 2 and what I think about them. This tier list will serve two purposes, and I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. It's to give you an idea of what a weapon's strengths and weaknesses are and what I think about them, as well as maybe serve as a point of reference for Torn Banner to maybe take a look at the weapons and see what might need a nerf, or what needs a buff, things like that. This is all unscripted. I'm just going to be speaking from my mind, and I'll throw in footage from the game in while I talk about this stuff. I'll try to make this as informative as I can. So to start off, we've got the Messer, which I believe to be the best weapon in the game by far. Like, this weapon's insane. Although it's insane in a weird way. It's undoubtedly the best weapon in the game. Honestly, it's just so good. But unlike some of the other best weapons in the game, or some of the weapons that I think are broken and need a nerf, the Messer isn't a weapon that just wins you fights. I'm gonna go over the short sword in a bit, but short sword is insane and really easy to use. The Messer doesn't do anything for you. It's just fantastic at everything. If you can understand what I mean. It's got a fantastic stab, the overhead does insane damage, the reach is fantastic, it's not too slow, the slash does very good damage, better than a lot of weapons that you would expect to have good damage on that. It's so good at everything. The two classes can have it. Vanguard can have two of them on the Raider class, and Knight can take this weapon as well if you feel like playing Knight instead, which I usually do. I don't really like playing Vanguard too much. It's so good. It does everything. I think it needs a nerf, but not I don't think it needs a nerf for too many reasons. I think the stab could use a nerf in both speed and damage. And I think that, honestly, it probably needs a length reduction. It needs to get circumcised. It's sort of insane how long it is. It's longer than a lot of weapons, and it probably shouldn't be longer than a lot of weapons. It's longer than the Longsword. I think it's about as long as the Poleaxe. It's shorter than Greatsword, but it doesn't feel too much shorter than Greatsword. Probably about the same length, maybe a little bit shorter than Polehammer. You know what I mean? It's super long. It's honestly crazy. But it's just so good at everything. It's the Mordhau Greatsword of this game. And hopefully it gets a little bit more specialized, If it was made shorter, it would be a really good sword, but it would, it wouldn't just overshadow a lot of weapons. Coming up right after that is the one-handed sword, which I think is also insane. But it's insane in a different way. I don't think it's undisputedly the best, but it's definitely one of the best dueling weapons, and it's no slouch in 1vx either. It's fast, it does great damage for how fast it is, it's long for a one-hander. I think it's either the longest or second longest one-hander besides the one-handed spear, which is, that's a spear, you can't really expect too much out of that. It's fantastic. The stab on it especially is just bananas. Insane. I don't know who... That's crazy. You can take it as a man-at-arms on the Footman class, which gives you more movement speed and gives you a dodge buff as well. Or you can take it as a secondary while playing as Knight, which you get it with the Officer subclass, the one that gets Longsword, the first subclass that Knight has. This is a secondary weapon for them, so that's fantastic. Honestly, that's a bit insane for a secondary. That thing's like a primary weapon that you just get to put in your pocket. Overall, really good weapon. If I could nerf anything about it, I honestly just think it needs to be a touch slower, especially the stab. I don't even think it does too much stab damage. It's just too fast for how much damage it's doing. Just a little tweak, I think. It's always going to be a good weapon. It's just a staple. It's fundamental. And if you were to like slow it down, it wouldn't really have much of a place there. I honestly don't think the slash or overhead is a problem. Just the stab. Speaking of stabs, here comes the Longsword. Longsword does actually the same damage as the one-handed sword, except it does more stab damage, and it's a little bit slower and longer, and you only get this on the Knight class. The Longsword's really good. It doesn't feel like it's overpowered in any way. It's unique to one class, which is good. Unique weapons to classes is a good thing. The slash damage is 40, which is it's on the low side. The overhead's 50, which is fine. And the stab damage is 55, and if you make it heavy, it's like 70, and that's fine. That's all good damage. That's a pretty well-rounded thing. You know, its 1vx is going to be a little bit weaker because its horizontal slash does lower damage, and the stab is going to be great. It's like the main attack you do with the longsword is the stab. And that's fine. I honestly really like using it. This weapon has the most fun factor for me. I think it's one of the most fun weapons to just like use for a bit. It's not my favorite weapon in the game, but it's just a blast. It feels so good to just use. And it's already becoming some people's favorite weapon as well, and it should. It's a good one. I don't think it really needs any nerfs or buffs. I think it's in a fantastic spot. And now here comes Halberd. Anybody who knows me would know what I think of Halberd already. I think Halberd is very good. I think Halberd has the potential to be one of the best weapons in the game, and the only reason it's not up here, and I'm sticking it in A, is because it's complicated to describe, but I'll try my best. Halberd is the longest weapon in the game, besides maybe the spear, but I think they're about even, if that. I think it's longer than the spear, but I can't know that for sure. The stat screen says it is, but that's all I've got. It doesn't have good damage. It's fine damage. That's how I describe it. It's fine. The slash is 40, about the same as the longsword. The overhead does 50 and the stab does 50. It does get the axe damage bonus against footmen and knights, which is a little better, but it's still kind of... It's not great, especially with how slow it is. I think this is the second slowest weapon in the game, and the only thing that's slower is the Maul. It's very, very good with its reach, and it's not good if you're not using your reach. That said, the reach is so oppressive that it's like... It's such a powerful weapon just by using the reach. Being able to range people is the most powerful tool in this entire game, I feel. You poke somebody out of range and then you bait them to swing, and if they're too far away and they couldn't possibly catch up, then you just get a free hit sometimes. It's so good. And you know, it's pretty... It's not like unusably slow. The problem I can see with the speed is that a lot of times if somebody's just mashing, like let's say that the person you're fighting is not very good. No offense to them, of course. You know, everybody's trying to get better. The game's very early in its lifespan. the person you're fighting is not very good, and they're just kind of hammering the left mouse button, or, you know, they're on the controller, the trigger, I think. They're just mashing on the button, trying to hit you as much as they can. And they don't really know what they're doing, and you hit them, and most weapons would not be able to swing through your combo. But when you're using Halberd, people can swing through your combo, and it's just... I actually don't think any other weapon has this problem. Like, Maul doesn't have this problem because it has quick combos when you hit somebody, but Halberd does because it's almost as slow as the Maul, but it doesn't stop on combos, or on hit. It's ridiculous how difficult Halberd can be to use sometimes, and like sometimes it's fine, like you don't feel too many if any complications, but sometimes it just feels like a real uphill battle. And when you're fighting longer weapons like Greatsword or Polehammer or some other polearms, you don't really feel the reach anymore, and it feels just like a worse weapon to use. But I don't want to suggest buffs for it because it's... I don't know, it's so good already. It just doesn't feel good sometimes. It feels like a chore. It feels just gross to use sometimes. And I feel like I could get buffed up really easily. I feel like it's not too hard to make this weapon just a smidge better. You won't feel it too much when you're fighting a bad player, or somebody worse than you, I should say, not a bad player. If you're better than the other person, you can use Halberd fantastically, and I've done so for a very long time. I've used this weapon for a super long time, and I'm probably going to keep using it because it's my favorite. I love polearms and halberds. But when I'm fighting like a really good player like God King, or Punisher, or Jet, but all three of the people I just listed are very good at the game, by the way, just to throw that out there. It quickly becomes an uphill battle as they don't let me use my reach. And like, you know, if I outplay them, I outplay them, but now it feels like I have to hit them more, and I have to work harder to land those hits. So I take that for what you will. I think maybe it could use a buff here or there, but not really too much. Just something. Just give it a little tap. Just a little bump. A good example of a problem would be that the slash does like 40 damage, and that's pathetic with how slow it is. And the overhead is almost invalidated by the stab, because the stab is just kind of better. You can't drag it as much, but you don't really drag overheads too much to begin with. And the overhead is going to be much slower than the stab, because stabs are sort of a direct travel attack, whereas an overhead is sort of like, you know, the wind-up finishes and the attack starts coming out, and you can't connect to them until it reaches the person. But they do the same damage, and they even get the axe damage bonus, which is, I think, like 25% on knights and 17% on footmen. I'll throw it on screen, whatever it is. It's you know, like, it just feels odd. It feels off. But I've used this weapon for a long time, and regardless, I really like the range stuff I can do with it and the range pressure I get with it. And I can still beat people with it. I just have to work much harder sometimes. It could just use a little tap, a little bump. Another issue worth bringing up is right here during this fight. There's a bunch of instances where I try to feint the person with a fast weapon, and they fall for the feint, and they don't properly match it, but they just land hits anyway. Right here, I feint to a slash, and they just go for a slash anyway and hit me first. I feint in a stab to an overhead, and they try to counter the stab, and they just hit me first anyway. And there's a lot of instances like that, where you just kind of get shut down for things that aren't really your fault. Because weapons aren't supposed to be that crazy, but that one-handed sword is just so fast, it just shuts you down so easy. And right behind Halberd comes Polehammer, which is insane. Polehammer is crazy good. It's like Halberd if you made Halberd just a little bit shorter, and you made it do a lot more damage, and you made it faster, like much faster. And you also made it delete knights, because this thing does crazy damage to knights because of its blunt damage bonus. I would consider using this if it wasn't blunt. What you're gonna find if you aren't familiar with this game or don't really know the mechanics too well, all blunt weapons stop when you hit somebody, unless you do a heavy attack. If you do a heavy attack, your attack goes through, and if you do a normal attack, it will stop on contact, unless you hit their parry, which it doesn't, but if they counter it, it does. Either way, when you hit somebody with Polehammer, you can follow it up really quickly, which makes it seem even faster than it is, and it's already faster than Halberd, and it's probably about the same speed as Messer, but that's just me going off of my memory. I could be, you know, I haven't seen them side by side. It's really, really good. And I would, if it was just a little longer, I'd probably use it despite its, like, problems. But something I feel in like, team fights, like 1vx, is just, like, sometimes you need to cleave through everybody, like, really, really fast. And with Polehammer, you have to do a heavy to do that, and sometimes you can't afford it. Sometimes you just cannot afford to do a heavy, and that makes it really, really tough. But that's about the list of complaints I have with it. It doesn't need any buffs. It's honestly, if the only downside it has is that it's blunt. It's fantastic. It's an amazing weapon. And if you stick around in duels and stuff, you're not even gonna feel the downside. In fact, your downside becomes an upside in duels. Being a blunt weapon is not an entirely negative thing, because in duels you get really, really fast follow-ups and combos. It's just only a problem in group fights. And that's consistent across all the blunt weapons. So I think that axes and swords are always going to be just better for that reason, but that's only sometimes. I honestly don't think... I'm not sure how I feel about blunt weapons having, like, hit stop. It feels kind of nice sometimes, but I feel like it's downgrading every blunt weapon overall because of it. It's just a small point. As far as the weapon goes, it's great. Short sword is the first weapon I'm gonna talk about that I think needs a heavy nerf. I think short sword is too good, and if you couldn't tell, I think it's too good. I mean, consider what weapons are above it. Every weapon above it is a primary weapon, and this is a secondary, and it's above all these other weapons down here. It's too good. This weapon has no business being as good as it is. It completely invalidates other secondaries. It's as good as a primary, and people have it in their secondary slot. It's too fast. It's insanely too fast. Like, it's almost unreactable to, like, sometimes, you know. You could just wait for somebody with a slow weapon like Halberd to just do something and then just stab them for it. And I've done that. I've done that to people. It's gross. It's disgusting. Heaven forbid you fight somebody with a Maul. We'll have to just bait you into attacking and then punish you for it. But I mean, that's not even a punish, you know, that's just a retaliation. You can still outplay them after that. It's too strong, and all the damage is good. It does as much damage as Halberd does on a stab. It does as much damage as the one-handed sword does on a stab, the Messer. It does 50 damage on a stab, and it does like 35 or 40 damage on an overhead, and like 35, 40 damage on a slash. I'll probably correct that on screen. And, you know, if this was a primary weapon, it wouldn't be too big of a deal. But it's not a primary weapon, it's a secondary weapon. This is people's backup. And the main problem I see is that it, along with a lot of one-handers that are really good, it's just too fast. And by being too fast, you give people an opportunity to just mash and sometimes get away with it. Like when I'm fighting Halberd with this weapon, it's just a nightmare. You know, like I can hit somebody and then like I don't even get a follow-up. They just attack through anyway. And that feels really bad sometimes. That said, I can sort of mitigate this by comboing to jab with when I'm using Halberd, but that's like people should not have to deal with people attacking through the combos. Especially since the tutorial tells you that you can't do this, but you know, sometimes you can. I also just think I think this just invalidates other secondaries a lot, and it actually invalidates the Dagger, which is a primary weapon for one class, which is the Ambusher or Assassin. I forget the name of it. It's the 3rd Vanguard subclass. The Dagger is supposed to be like really good. It's the only unique weapon that class has. And Dagger would be really good if it was buffed up a little bit, and if the short sword didn't completely invalidate it. Because I think Dagger is like a lot of fun to use. It's just every time I've ever used the Dagger, I just think, why am I not just using the short sword, which is so much better. Next up, we have the Poleaxe. The Poleaxe is a knight exclusive weapon, just like the Longsword. It's in the same subclass, which means you can have the one-handed sword secondary, which is really good, by the way. Poleaxe is basically the Halberd. It has the exact same damage, but it's shorter by a little bit. I think it's about as long as the Polehammer, maybe just a touch shorter. And it's faster. It's faster than the Halberd by a considerable amount. It's honestly, it's very good. I don't think it really needs too many tweaks. I think that the damage, just like Halberd, is a little bit anemic, but with Poleaxe it's a little bit better because the weapon's just faster. And with Halberd, your weapon's so slow that the anemic damage just feels terrible. God, I'm telling you, if you didn't have the reach on Halberd, it would be so bad. Poleaxe feels just nice to use. I really like using it. Every time I've used Poleaxe, I've just had a nice time. It's just that I generally prefer Halberd because it's longer, but Halberd doesn't have to. Halberd has that speed issue, and Poleaxe doesn't. And you also get to play as Knight, and playing as Knight is fun because you have a huge health pool, and there's some issues with the health pools right now because of damage bonuses, but you're very tanky. I'll go over class health after the tier list just to talk about it, because there's some issues there too, but it's not too important right now. Poleaxe feels good. It's a good weapon. Can compete with every weapon on this list. Even the S tier weapons. It's just good. It's a very good weapon. And here comes the Greatsword, which is a Vanguard exclusive weapon. That is all. This weapon could be in S tier. It's so good. Greatsword is so good, but the reason I'm putting it here and not somewhere else. You know what? I'm gonna throw it. I'm gonna throw it up here. Yeah, that's about right. Greatsword is really good. It's got a huge damage overhead. The slash damage is really good. The stab isn't very good. I'm gonna put it back down. The stab is weak on this weapon. Doesn't go very long. It's kind of slow. The whole weapon's kind of slow, but I mean that's fine for what it is. But it just doesn't do very good damage, and the reach is not fully utilized. You sort of grab it halfway up when you stab with it. This weapon is good. It's stylish, and the overhead is good too. It does 70 damage, which you can make 90 with a heavy, and that's good enough to two-shot every class. The only problem is that the Messer does more damage than the Greatsword. They do the same stab damage and the same overhead damage, but the slash damage on the Messer actually does more damage. And the Messer is faster, and the Messer is almost as long as the Greatsword, and you can bring 2 of them if you play Vanguard, which is stupid. That's so dumb. It's so dumb, man. Greatsword's one issue is just that the Messer is like so much better, in my opinion. Granted that the Messer doesn't do everything better. You know, Greatsword is longer, and that is a point. You know, like the Messer is just shorter than the Greatsword, but it doesn't matter because it's almost negligible. It's almost negligible, and when you compare it to just having more damage, you know, reach does not always come into play. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't, and the Messer gets advantages over the Greatsword. And you get to pick it between 2 classes, and Greatsword you can't. Greatsword you're stuck on Vanguard whether you want to or not. And the Messer also gets better secondaries if you decide you want to play Knight. And if you know, play Vanguard, just bring 2 Messers, you know. Why have a secondary? You can just have 2 of them. Now you have a throwing Messer. Greatsword, I don't think it needs any buffs as well. I think it's fine. I think it's a stylish, charismatic weapon with good damage and a good spread of stuff, and I like that its stab is a little bit weaker. That's fine with me. I just don't think the Messer should be better than it in every way. I think that sucks. I think that sucks a lot. Next up is the Maul. Maul is very good, but Maul is a blunt weapon, so it has that thing I talked about with Polehammer. The Maul is the slowest weapon, but it also isn't if you hit somebody. Basically, the Maul has the slowest speeds for wind-up and, I think, travel speed as well. But if you hit somebody, the rest of your swing gets cancelled, and you can immediately follow it up with another swing. So it's not always going to feel super slow. You can combo with it surprisingly fast. It has an amazing stamina game. I don't know the stamina values for weapons, but I've definitely felt when I'm using Maul that, like, I'm stamming people out a lot. Like, I disarmed people a lot today when I used it. And it feels like a monster. But it's also extremely short, and that speed really does matter. The same thing that I talked about with Halberd, where it's just like, sometimes you're fighting a fast weapon and they can just sort of reaction punish you. Like, it can feel like a struggle, like an uphill battle to use Maul. But what you get in return is the ability to two-shot any class with any attack that's not your stab, and you can one-shot every class right now with your special. Your special attack, I don't really talk too much about the special attacks because they're all just sort of big, slow power attacks that don't really matter too much in the overall viewing of a weapon. But in Maul's case, you know, being able to one-shot everybody is a big factor. It's worth mentioning. The attack's very, very slow, but, you know, you hit somebody, they're dead. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I mean, that's fine with me. The Maul has enough weaknesses going for it that I don't think that's too much of an issue. It's a super good weapon. It's a monster if you run up behind people, which you do a lot as you're playing Vanguard because Vanguard's very fast. But it's never going to be better than the weapons I put above it, in my opinion, because of its shortcomings. But that said, you know, a weapon being weaker than another weapon objectively does not mean you can't use it. That's something I should say about this tier list. It doesn't matter where I put a weapon. If you're better than the other person, you can beat the other person. And if you think Maul is fun, for example, you can beat every weapon on this list if you play it well. You might have to struggle. I think Maul versus Halberd is incredibly in Halberd's favor. Same with any other long weapon like Polehammer, Greatsword. If you're outranging Maul, Maul's going to just struggle a lot. And the amount that Maul's going to struggle increases as the weapons get longer. So, you know, with Halberd, it's the longest. It's just really, really tough. But that's just, you know, it's typical of shorter weapons. Shorter weapons are going to struggle unless they're really fast, and Maul isn't really fast. still, it's a great weapon, and I think people are really gonna like it if they like that kind of thing. They just have to work a little bit harder for it. The shovel.
Might I interest you in a shovel?
For the glory of Alcatraz!
It was nerfed in this this beta build. It got nerfed a bit. It's still just as fast as it was. Somebody told me it was slower, but when I was using it today, it's not slower. It's still really fast. It hits like a truck, honestly. Like it does super good damage. It's fast, good damage. So what's the downside? There's a couple. It's really short. It's like really short. I think it's shorter than the Maul. And you have to play it with Field Engineer, and Field Engineer doesn't have a secondary. So the downside of that is if you like don't manage your stamina very well and you do get disarmed, you're actually in a situation where you don't have any backup options. Like you just have your fists out, and you're gonna have to recover from that immediately or lose. And that's tough. I mean, that is a tough thing, and I think that the classes only matter in some capacities for how good a weapon is, and this is like one of those examples. You know, shovel could easily be like a little bit like higher up on this tier list, but because it doesn't come with a secondary ever, you just got to deal with that. That is a factor. Shovel's very good, it's very fun, it has a very satisfying thunk noise, and it's funny. You can use it and laugh and go, haha, haha, I hit you with shovel. Very fun. I'm glad it didn't get nerfed too hard. Next up is the Battle Axe. Battle Axe, there's not too much I can really say about this weapon. It's fast. Not too fast, it's fast. It does good damage. It's not very long. It's satisfying to use. It's stylish. And that's honest. Like there's really not a lot here to talk about. I almost need to extend what to talk about this weapon because there's not, I have all this footage and I gotta use it. It's probably the best version of this kind of weapon. There's three: the Battle Axe, War Axe, and the Executioner Axe, which I'll go over, soon. It doesn't feel slow, so the faster option doesn't really matter, and it does great damage, so the other, the heavier hitting option doesn't really matter either. You can take this weapon on Vanguard and on Knight, and it's just a good pick. It's very standard, Its stab damage is surprisingly good as well, which is something the other axes don't have. The stab damage on this, I believe I did 50 stab damage to somebody. It's good. It's just good. There's not too much I can say about it other than that. It's good. Next up is the War Axe, which is just slightly less good, but that's like so minor. Really, it's like maybe a smidge longer. It's a little faster. The damage is about the same. It has a worse stab, and it does do noticeably less damage, but not enough that you can't pick this over it if you prefer the upsides. Like, picking between these two is almost preference, with just a little bit leaning towards Battle Axe. It doesn't matter. The only difference is you can take Battle Axe on Vanguard or Knight, and War Axe is a Knight-only weapon. And I believe when you take War Axe, you also get to pick the one-handed sword as a secondary, and you don't with Battle Axe, so that's a plus. Better secondary is always nice. It's good. It's a good weapon. And here comes the Glaive, which is... I wasn't originally going to put it on this tier, but it does deserve to be on this tier. It's really fast, like insanely fast. It's long. It's not as long as the Polehammer. Maybe just a smidge shorter. I think it feels longer than the Pole Axe. It's probably about as long as the Greatsword. I don't know, but it's long. It does super bad damage, but that doesn't matter. It's not supposed to really do a ton of damage. It's fast and it's long and it cleaves, so this thing's a 1vx monster right away. And its only real downside is that there are some weapons that are longer than it, and its damage sucks. It does get a damage bonus. It gets the axe damage bonus for some reason, which means that you're going to be getting a little bit more damage against footmen and knights, but you're already doing so low damage that the multiplier there doesn't really add up to a ton. But it's a fun weapon. It's nice. I really don't think it looks good though. I think it's kind of ugly. And while looks don't really matter too much, it matters a little bit, you know? it matters some. I think that a weapon that looks gross, maybe, you know, there's charisma there. Like, I don't think a weapon looks and feels as good as Greatsword. Greatsword is just so stylish. It's so pretty. You know, you're holding it in your hand and you just feel like a champion. And with Halberd, I mean, I love Halberd, so that aesthetic pleases me. Same with Polehammer. But Glaive is just ugly. It's icky. Blech. Get it away. But as far as a weapon, it's very good, and you can definitely use it well if that's your sort of playstyle. And next up is a weapon that almost goes in B tier. I almost think it deserves to be in A tier, but I'm going to throw it in B because there are negatives. The negatives are starting to stack up. Warhammer is a one-handed weapon on Guardian, which Guardian is kind of bad because shields are bad. It's a knight-only one-handed weapon. It's blunt, it does fantastic damage, it's short, and fast. Because it's blunt, it has to deal with those problems I talked about with 1vx, so it's really, really good for duels. And it just deletes knights. You can two-shot a knight if you just get like a nice hit in. Get one heavy in there, and now you're just gonna destroy their day. The downsides, like, besides, you know, being blunt and short, is that on top of being short, you also have to play Guardian. And Guardian, by default, you know, having a shield makes you just a little bit slower. And this is a short weapon, and you're also playing the slowest class. And those things add up to having low effective range. You know, you can't really move into range very quickly, and you don't have any range to use as well. It's just a bit of an uphill battle sometimes. I know when people who are really good with the Warhammer fight me when I'm using Halberd, they just can sometimes struggle. Like, I can just poke them out of range over and over again, and they can't get into range sometimes. Especially because, like, there's just a little bit of knockback when you hit somebody. So, like, when I'm stabbing them with my Halberd and then backing up, you know, I can maybe force them to block like 5-6 hits in a row. Like, I did that to somebody earlier. I don't know if I have footage of it. I'll throw it on screen if I do. Like, that stinks, you know? Like, imagine. That's an uphill battle. Granted, they could counter my stab and then negate the effects of knockback, but, you know, you really have to work for it. Still, I think it's one of the best one-handers. And in fact, the only two one-handers that are better than it on this tier list is a short sword and one-handed sword, which I both think are insane. Coming up next is the Dane Axe. Dane Axe is exclusive to the Raider subclass on Vanguard, which means you can take 2 of them. Same as the Messer. It's like the Battle Axe or War Axe. It does a little bit less damage, maybe about the same as War Axe. But it's really, really short, but it's so much faster. And you get one of the best thrown weapons in the game. You know, like, you're in the middle of a fight, just press the throw button once in a while. And you can just yuck this thing at them and punish them for being out of range or anything. The damage on this is broken. You can actually one-shot every class except Knight. Maybe you can one-shot Knight? I don't know. I haven't one-shot a Knight yet, but I remember I hit somebody with the Dane Axe this beta, and I did 150-something damage and just one-shot them. I'll throw that clip on screen. I think that was during my stream the other day. I'll throw it on screen now if I did.
I'd be wounded.
I just did 150 damage to that guy in an axe throw. God.
I don't think it's good enough to be on A tier, but it's very good, and also it looks great. You know, it's got a really nice long handle, and even though you don't use the reach very well on it, you know, you sort of hold it up around the shaft probably to make it faster. It's powerful. It looks good. It's pretty unique, and it's like damage, speed, and range things, and I think it's also unique because it's a two-hander. It's just a neat. I like it. It's a neat weapon. I can only say that it, like, if it was a little bit longer, I'd easily put it in A tier. It's just short. Sometimes you can really feel the range issues with it. It's good though, and it's fun. It's unique. The one-handed axe is this can be a primary on Guardian, but it's mostly a secondary for some people. It's really good. It's probably the best secondary that isn't a short sword or, you know, one-handed sword, because the Warhammer is not a secondary. It hits like a truck, it cleaves, it gets the axe damage bonus. It's pretty fast, too. It's a little bit short, but I mean, that's to be expected. And it looks pretty good, too. Honestly, there's no complaints here with this. This weapon's fine. It's not any higher, though, because it's kind of a secondary weapon. This isn't a weapon you take by itself most of the time. But if you did, it's fine, you know? Like, you could use this weapon very well in, like, team objective or even duels. It's just mostly, it's going to be a good secondary option if you don't feel like using a sword. And I mean, I would take it, honestly. It's good. Next up is the Falchion. Falchion is a weird weapon. It's a weapon that I thought was worse than it is, and a lot of people also thought it's worse than it is. It's a sword. It's kind of worse than the one-handed axe, but I think it's a bit longer. I think it has a better stab, and well, I don't know that for sure. If I'm not, I'll correct myself right now. It's fine. It's fine. It's not a secondary for most classes, but some classes get the option to take it. It's a primary for Guardian. It's just kind of there. I don't see much reason to pick it, but that doesn't mean it's bad. If you picked it because you like how it looks or anything, it's, you know, it's fine. It does good damage. It's not slow. It's a bit slower than the other one-handers, but like it's not slow. It's fine. Next up is the Morningstar. And also the Mace. And I'm doing these two at the exact same time because they are the exact same weapon. Maybe one's a little bit faster than the other. I can't tell. They're about the same length. Somebody said the one-handed mace is faster. I don't think that's true. They both do the same damage. They both do... They have the same reach. A Morningstar is a primary for some people and a secondary for, like, Knight. The one-handed mace is a secondary for some people. They're both kind of fast when you hit people because they're blunt and they have that combo thing I told you about. Where you hit somebody and just, you get a really fast follow-up. They both have weakish stabs. They're both short. They're really unremarkable, honestly. They're not terrible. Like, you could use them and kill people. I did with it, but I also had plenty of times where I just, like, missed a lot because I was out of range. It feels a bit like a struggle, honestly. It's not great. But, like, they're fine. Especially, like, if you take it as a secondary, like, it's fine. Especially, like, the nice thing that these weapons have is that they have, like, 50% more damage against knights. So, like, if you're dealing with a lot of knights and you happen to take this as a secondary, you can just kind of bonk them really quickly. Or maybe even if you, like, you could maybe take the Falchion or maybe the one-handed sword for a primary and then switch off to the mace for a secondary option. And that would give you a benefit against knights, if that's something you want to do. You know, you switch from between your primary and secondary often. But now we are going to get into weapons that do have problems. Starting off with the Executioner Axe, which, with the last beta, I would have put up here. And now it's down here. The Executioner Axe used to be insane. It used to just be nuts. It was so long, it did so much damage, and it was slow, but that doesn't matter with how good it is at dragging and how much damage it was doing. And I actually didn't realize how nerfed it was until I was recording today, and I was using it, and it felt just terrible. It felt like the damage wasn't very good, and it felt like it was just really slow, and the stab is like bad now, whereas before it was too good. It was doing more damage than the Halberd stab. Doing like 55, 60 damage on the stab, but now it's like not doing that. It's doing like 30, 35 if you hit a knight. This weapon is no longer nearly as good, and I don't think it's bad enough to where you can't use it, but for me, it really felt like a struggle. I really had a hard time using it, even against, like, weaker players, I feel. Sorry, I don't like to classify people as weaker, stronger, because, you know, everybody's learning right now. The game is new, and I have more experience than most people, and eventually that experience will go away as people get better and better. You know, right now I've got 400 hours and somebody else has like 5. You know, it's not really fair. This weapon, I don't want to suggest buffs for it, because if this weapon's too strong, it sort of invalidates the other axes like Battle Axe, War Axe, even Dane Axe. But if it's where it is right now, it feels just bad, but it's not bad enough to where people can't use it. I think if the stab was made like much faster because it's doing much lower damage, I think that would be fine. You know, because then the normal attacks are slow, but then it's got that really fast poke. You know, sort of like the Mordhau Battle Axe. I think that was the Mordhau Battle Axe that had that sort of thing. Yeah, that would be fine, in my opinion. I think it's just a little bit too slow and not doing enough damage to compensate for it. And Halberd, like, you know, Halberd is slow as well, but Halberd has that reach to go with it. You know, Executioner Axe doesn't have that. Next up is the War Club, War Club is stupid. War Club is super duper fast. Its damage sucks. It gets a damage bonus against knights with that 50%, but it's like, it doesn't cleave, just, you know, as all blunt weapons don't. It doesn't cleave, it's got really fast follow-ups, it's fast anyway. I mean, look at this thing, it's fucking silly. This thing is goofy. I'd almost say this is like a meme weapon, and the damage got nerfed, I believe, as well, so it hits like a noodle, and it moves like a noodle. And you know what, I think that's okay. I think the weapon's fine where it is. I don't think this is a weapon that people are really going to take seriously, but I think that it's also... I think it's fast enough and long enough and doing just enough damage where if somebody really, really wanted to use this, they could be really good with it. That said, I'm not going to put it any higher because, you know, you're going to have to hit people a lot with this thing and really outplay people, but it is, like, I don't think it's that bad. In fact, I'm gonna put that right there. I really don't think it's that bad. It's fine. You know what? Bam. I'm gonna put it there. War Club is surprisingly good. I don't think it's that bad. It's just like, it's not good, it's just like you could be really good. It's sort of just a goofy, silly weapon. It's exclusive to Vanguard. I think, yeah, it's on a Vanguard class. It's just, it's goofy, dude. It's a silly weapon. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this thing. You know, this thing is kind of like the Mortal Quarterstaff, if anybody's played with that, where it's just like, you know, it's kind of goofy, it's blunt, so it has hit stop. You just kind of bonk people with it over and over again. It's kind of long. Yeah, this is just the Mortal Quarterstaff, just with a little spiky bit on the end. And all the skins look really silly too. I mean, look at it. It's just a stick with like a pointy, like spiky pointy bit at the end. Next up is another weapon I'm going to put in front of the Executioner Axe. The two-handed hammer. I thought this thing was worse. It's not that bad, but I still don't like it. And it's still just a worse polehammer. It hits a bit like a noodle, or not like a noodle. The damage isn't fantastic. It's not super fast. It's not super long. The only real benefit is that you can have a polehammer-like weapon on Knight or on Vanguard, whereas polehammer is exclusive to Footmen. It's like it's just sort of odd. It doesn't feel very good to use, but it's like it can feel a little speedy sometimes. It's like when you're doing those combos, but polehammer just feels better for that. In fact, a lot of these blunt weapons feel better than this does for it. It's fine. It doesn't look very good either. Yes, just C tier. There you go. And two-handed mace, another weapon I'm gonna put this fucking thing down here. Two-handed mace is also pretty stinky. It's sort of in the same boat, where it's a little bit faster than the two-handed hammer, but it's a little bit shorter. The damage on it is fine, you know, same as the two-handed hammer. It's fine. It's just, why would I use this over polehammer? Unless I feel like playing Knight. This is an exclusive weapon to Knight as well. I think? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's exclusive to Knight. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. It looks nice. I don't like the length of it myself. When I was using it, I just kind of felt like the length was pretty bad. And I didn't like the... I don't know, it wasn't hitting as hard as I would like. Against knights it's fine, but I mean, any blunt weapon against knights does an insane amount of damage because of that 50% bonus. I mean, even the shovel's better for that. You know, if I want to take out knights that bad, I can take the shovel and then also laugh. You know, the shovel just like I can two-shot a knight with the shovel if I do like a heavy attack. Yeah, why wouldn't I just use the shovel? Yeah, this thing belongs in C tier. Like, it's fine, but it's just not as good. Next up is the dagger. Dagger would be higher if it was given a little bit of a buff and the short sword didn't exist. Dagger is exclusive to the ambusher or assassin class on Vanguard, which is a pretty cool class. You get like 9 throwing knives and... Wait, you get 7. You get 7 throwing knives and you get to take this cool dagger, which is different than the knife, which is a lot of people's secondary. This weapon does 50 stab damage, and it's pretty fast and short. But that doesn't really matter because it's a really cool weapon to use, like, you know, to have a really good like battle dagger. The problem is the slash and overhead damage on it stink, and the short sword is just better than it. It's about the same speed as the short sword. The short sword does the same damage, if not better damage. Yeah, the short sword does the same stab damage and better slash and overhead. It's and you know, short sword's longer as well. And you can take short sword on ambusher as well, so there's no reason to really take the dagger. It could be really good if it was buffed. I think it could even use a buff. I think if it got buffed, it would be fine because it's such a unique weapon in the lineup. Just it would need something. I feel like you could buff the damage on the dagger quite a bit and it would be fine because it's so unique and short and stuff. You know, like if this thing did like 60 damage on a stab and like 45 damage on an overhead and slash, I feel like it wouldn't be too strong. I feel like I would at most put it at like high B tier if it was that strong. Cuz like, you know, it would rule in like a close duel or something, like if you face hug, but what are you gonna do when I'm using Halberd? You know, I'll just range you. You're gonna struggle. You're gonna have to like face hug me, and I'm pretty good at reacting to throwing knives now. I've gotten used to it. Though I do have to say, dagger really shines when you're using throwing knives with it, and assuming that short sword gets nerfed, which I think it should. Dagger plus throwing knives, you can do some... You've got a lot of power there, because all your range is offset by the throwing knives if you just throw someone at somebody who's doing something. Or, you know, somebody who's not expecting it. You know, you can get away with it a lot. I think if you're fighting a really good player, they'll react to it, but not everybody's really good, and even a really good player isn't always going to expect it if you're in team objective. Pickaxe is an interesting weapon. I actually thought it was an F tier weapon until I used it today. It's not amazing, but it's a solid pick for engineer, I think. It's got a couple mistakes that I'm going to go over, and I think it could use some changes that would make it better. But first off, it's the only one-handed engineer weapon that engineer can have, which means that if you're playing team objective, you can pick up torches or a shield off the ground, which, you know, those are some pretty decent options right there. You don't get a secondary. The damage on it is fine, you know, it's respectable damage. You hit somebody with it, they hurt. The biggest problems I feel is that it has hit stop, and it's not a blunt weapon. It gets the axe damage bonus, and that to me is a huge mistake. This weapon is way worse than it could be. Not only, like, it's a pickaxe, but I feel like it would be better if it did have hit stop, but it also got the blunt damage bonus. Because, I mean, honestly, like the pick, imagine hitting a helmet with a pickaxe. I don't think there's a better weapon for that kind of thing. You know, that spike on the top goes right through a helmet if you were to hit it hard enough. Hell, that's better than a lot of weapons on this list in reality for hitting a helmet. It could be a lot better, and I think that like it has a place because it's one-handed on Engineer. If you really want to play Engineer, Engineer does have some benefits to breaking things. When you play Engineer, you get a 100% damage bonus to hitting objects. You know, breakable things that aren't players. And I think that's rad. But it's not super great, but it's a lot better than I expected. I think you could use this weapon very well. And now comes the one-handed spear. One-handed spear is, in my opinion, a weapon that doesn't even deserve to be on C tier. I think it needs to be lower. But it gets to be here because its animations are terrible. The animations on this weapon are disgusting. They're evil. They're vile. Nobody can read this thing. I can't read this thing. I think it's terrible. Whenever somebody fights me with this, I just wish I was not alive anymore. I wish I was playing a different game. I wouldn't be surprised if this weapon got entirely reworked, and you'll know in the future if it gets reworked, because, you know, it'll be different. I don't know why this weapon has a slash, stab, and overhead when the other spear does not. The other spear has 2 stabs, but also having 2 stabs is a bad thing, because it gives the weapon less options. I'll go over that when I get to the spear. It's just kind of a hideous weapon. It is really long, and it does pretty decent damage. And it is a one-hander, so you do get a couple options there, but it's just gross. The animations make it so much grosser than it should be. And it's not very good for 1vx either. I think the overhead and the slash have hit stop, which means when you hit somebody, Alright, next up is the Hatchet, which I'm still going to put in front of the Executioner Axe. Executioner Axe is bad. Hatchet is also bad. Hatchet is short and fast, and it does pretty decent damage, but not great damage. It's sort of outclassed entirely by the one-handed axe, but it is a secondary. You can't hold too much against it. Most of the time when you have the option of Hatchet, you also have the option of Short Sword, and we all know how good Short Sword is by now. Short Sword is insane. Hatchet is not insane. Hatchet is just fine as a secondary. It is something, it could get you out of a tight situation. It's pretty good against knights and footmen because of that damage bonus, but it doesn't do very good damage anyway, so you're not getting much of a bonus for hitting people with it, but it's fine. You can do some nasty damage with like a really good overhead heavy, which I used a couple times in my duels. It's not bad, it's just moderately bad. It could be a lot better. I don't know if it needs a buff though, you know, like it's fine. You can't really buff the stab. The damage on its slashes is fine, the speed's fine. Yeah, I think it's fine where it is. It's just never going to be a really good weapon, but it's not supposed to be. It's a secondary. And now I'm going to put in the Cudgel. The Cudgel is bad. It's bad. The Cudgel sucks. But the Cudgel is a meme weapon. It is a funny stick, kind of like the War Club. In fact, imagine a faster War Club, but also really, really tiny, and that's the Cudgel. Cudgel doesn't need any buffs. It doesn't need any nerfs. It's exactly what it's supposed to be. It is a fast, funny secondary. You slap people with it really fast, and they panic. And I do that a lot, even against a really good player. It's not good though. The damage is pathetic. It's anemic, and it's just so short. It's so short. But you know, you give people little tappy taps on the forehead until they stop moving. That's about it. I'm gonna avoid talking about the spear, and I'm gonna throw in the Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is short and slow, and the damage is not worth it. The damage isn't bad, but it's just definitely not worth it. You're also an engineer, so you don't get a secondary, and it's... The only thing this thing really has going for it is style. It's pretty stylish. It's not super slow, but it's just like... You could be getting so much more out of just a shovel, or even a pickaxe. The Sledgehammer is just... It's just not very good in my opinion. I don't think it's good at all. But it does have the most powerful attack on Engineer, which means that if you're breaking stuff, you can do like 120 damage in one hit. And then if you make it a heavy, that's even more. And that's nothing to slouch at. If you're breaking stuff, there's nothing better than the Sledgehammer. But I feel like the shovel could even do better just because it's faster. But I don't know that for sure. I'm gonna put the knife in D tier. It's better than I thought. I used it. It's better than I thought it was. The damage, I think, got buffed. I think it got buffed at some point. The damage is not great. I think it has hit stop, but it does more damage than I thought, and it's pretty fast. It's probably shorter than the length of your hand. I think fists have a longer reach. It's a bad secondary. It's not the worst, though. That prestige goes to the shovel. But there's really not too much reason to pick this, unless you think that the short sword is somehow too slow. Or you really like the aesthetic of like a big knife. I mean, that's something. And finally, the placement of the two-handed spear, which is something I avoided talking about this entire time, because it is a very hard weapon to place. And I think I'm going to settle it here. I think the two-handed spear is not good at all. I think the two-handed spear is terrible. And it's a very complicated answer why, which is why this is the last weapon I put on the tier list. The two-handed spear is... You don't have a slash, and you only have an overhead as a mix-up option. What does this mean? This means your left mouse button, which is your horizontal slash normally, is a stab. And your stab is another stab. And then your overhead is a, like, bonk that does 30 damage. You bonk people on the head. The problem with the spear is you only have 2 attacks. Both your LMB, which is your, your underhand stab, and your normal stab can be countered by the other person with a stab. Which means that they only have to look out for 2 attacks. They are never going to have to counter LMB in their life against a spear. And because the only mix-up you have is an overhead bonk, if I just counter stab every time and I'm wrong and you do an overhead, I'm only eating like 30 damage. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And if you do like an overhead heavy to make it like do 50 damage, now I can just react to it. Now it doesn't have the element of surprise. Now I can just see that you're doing heavy and react to it. And then I can counter it. The stab damage is pretty good on this. The length is amazing. I think it's as long as the Halberd, maybe just a little bit shorter according to the stat screen. This weapon can feel like one of the best weapons in the game if you're not fighting a one-on-one or you're not fighting a 1vx. When you're fighting a 1v1, it is not great if the person knows what they're doing. Even against a really good spear user, the spear user is going to have to struggle if the other person knows like spear's weaknesses, and I'm one of the people who do. This is why I'm putting it where I am. And in a 1vx, you don't have anything. You don't have any tools. You've got the length, and you can maybe try and dodge around and buy time, but you're like food. You can try and target switch, but good luck. Stabs have a very low turn speed, which means that target switching is going to be really hard with a stab. It's just not good. You're gonna have to work 1,000 times harder with this weapon unless you're just outnumbering people all the time. If you're like 2v1ing somebody, it's amazing. If you're holding a choke point, it's amazing. If you're not doing those 2 things I just said, you're struggling. And that is it's just not good. It's just not a good thing for a weapon to have. Those trade-offs are not worth it. This is like a weapon you hand to somebody who doesn't know how to play and tell them to just like sit behind you the whole time and help you the whole time. They really don't have to know what they're doing because they're going to contribute regardless if they're just stabbing the same person as you, because if somebody's stabbing you, they're just going to... Most people right now are like doing LMBs, and so if you counter LMB, you can just sort of let that fly and hit like everybody in front of you with like an arc. But spear, now you're doing a stab and you don't really have that luxury anymore. It's definitely not the worst weapon in the game, but you're gonna... I mean, even the Executioner Axe, has some better tools than the spear does. It's just the Executioner Axe is terrible. So I think spear is, even a little bit better than that. Spear has really high highs and some of the lowest lows. To talk about health real quick, I mentioned this before and I don't want to forget to talk about it. Right now in the current May 27th beta build, Vanguards are surprisingly really tanky, and Knights are not as tanky as they should be, and Footmen are even worse. There's some math to this. Vanguard will take a lower percent of his total health from blunt weapons than the Knight and Footman will. To be more specific, if I hit somebody with... Let's go the Battle Axe. You hit a Knight, a Vanguard, and a Footman with the Battle Axe, with the same attack. The number is going to go up for everybody. The Vanguard is going to take, 60 damage. The Footman's going to take, 70-something damage, and the Knight's going to take, 80-something damage. The problem there is that the Footman lost the biggest percentage of his health out of everybody, despite the Vanguard supposed to be a weaker, lighter class. However, the Vanguard does take more damage than the Knight as far as a total health percentage. But with blunt weapons, the Vanguard is actually taking the least out of everybody. The Footman takes the most again, and the Knight takes more than the Vanguard. So what this means is I actually have this example for sure. If a blunt weapon does 60 damage, which I think the Sledgehammer overhead does 60 damage, so I'll just use that one for an example. If I hit every class twice with the Sledgehammer overhead, the Vanguard will take 60 damage per hit for a total of 120 health. He'll be left with 10 health. If I hit a Footman, he will take, I think like 160 something. I'll put the exact math on screen. The Footman will take 2 hits of 81. The Footman will take 2 hits of 81 damage, which will do 162 damage, which means that he took 12 more health than he has total. He has 150. And the Knight will take 180, which is 5 more than his total health. So, you know, like, these classes are squishier than the Vanguard is, despite Vanguard's supposed to be the lightest class. That's why Vanguard has more stamina than the other two classes, and he also has more movement speed. And given, you know, this math right here, I don't think that's correct. I think that's a problem. I don't think that the Vanguard should be taking less damage overall. Like, if Vanguard is going to die in 2 hits, and Footman is also going to die in 2 hits, and Knight is also going to die in 2 hits, that's fine. I don't mind that, but they should never be taking more percentage of the health as the defenses go up, even with the damage bonuses. I think it should be the same or less going down the list. But hey, you know, I'm not the one I'm not the one who's in charge of this stuff. That's just my opinion, and I hope Tornbanner listens to me on this. Anyway, I've talked about all the weapons now, and that's about all we've got. I appreciate you all watching and sticking around. I'm sure this wasn't the most exciting video in the world, but hopefully you enjoyed it. I stream on Twitch Sunday to Thursday at 8:30 p.m. EST. I try not to miss any days. If I ever do, I talk about it on my Discord. I hope you all, you know, maybe come by.